Hi, this is Brad, and welcome to Brad English Podcast, your daily English listening podcast helping you speak English naturally. Hello, and welcome back to your English podcast. Today, I want to share something personal with you. Something I have not talked about much on this podcast because it involves admitting a failure, and admitting failure is not always easy. But I believe this particular failure and what I learned from it is going to be genuinely useful for you, possibly more useful than anything else I have shared in a long time. Because it gets to the heart of the problem that almost every intermediate English learner faces, the gap between understanding the language and being able to produce it in real time. The story begins at a professional conference about 2 years ago, and it involves a very simple English question that I completely failed to answer. By the end of today's episode, I am going to share exactly what I did to fix that failure. The specific morning habit I developed that changed my speaking ability more than years of formal study had, and the 3-step routine that you can begin using tomorrow morning. Let me start from the beginning. The conference was an international gathering of language educators, and I had been invited to attend as a presenter, which meant that my English needed to be functional, clear, and at least reasonably fluent for a few days. I had prepared my presentation carefully, and I felt reasonably confident about that part. What I had not prepared for was the informal, conversational English of the breaks, the lunches, the coffee moments between sessions, when people stand in clusters and talk to each other naturally and without scripts. It was during one of these breaks, on the first afternoon, that a woman sat down next to me. She was a language teacher from Australia, warm and easy to talk to. And after introducing herself, she turned to me and said, simply and cheerfully, "So, what brings you here?" Such a small question, 4 words. A question I had probably answered in my own language hundreds of times. But in English, in that moment, with the ambient noise of the conference hall around us, and the pressure of needing to sound like someone who worked professionally with language, I completely froze. Froze means became suddenly unable to move, speak, or think, as if frozen by cold. I opened my mouth. A few words started to form and then dissolved. I said something vague and inadequate, and she nodded politely, and the conversation drifted somewhere else. I sat there feeling like the floor had opened beneath me. This might sound like a small thing. It might sound like an overreaction to a normal moment of conversational difficulty. But it was not small to me because I knew exactly how much English I had studied, how many hours I had spent with the language, and Trowuski-teen, and how deeply this simple failure exposed the gap between all of that study and my actual ability to speak naturally under the mild pressure of real human interaction. I spent a lot of time after that conference thinking about what had happened and why, and over the following weeks I read everything I could find about the neuroscience of language production and the specific reasons why highly educated, knowledgeable language learners sometimes struggle to speak fluently in real-time situations. What I discovered confirmed what I think I had suspected for a long time, but had never fully articulated. The problem was not a lack of knowledge. The problem was a lack of practice at the specific cognitive task of producing spontaneous, unplanned spoken language under mild social pressure. Every language learning activity I had prioritized, reading, listening, studying grammar, doing comprehension exercises, even some speaking practice in structured, predictable formats, was fundamentally different from the neurological task of producing natural, spontaneous speech in a real social context. Spontaneous means happening naturally and without pre-planning, arising from an impulse of the moment rather than from deliberate preparation. The structured speaking practice I had done was more like rehearsed performance than real communication. And rehearsed performance uses different neural resources than spontaneous speech. This means that however good I became at performing prepared English, it would not automatically transfer to my ability to produce spontaneous conversational English. The specific skill I needed was something researchers sometimes call automaticity in production, the ability to produce language automatically and without conscious effort during the cognitive demands of real-time conversation. And the way to develop automaticity in language, just as in sport or music, is not more knowledge. It is specific, repeated, daily practice of the exact skill you want to automate. In my case, that skill was spontaneous spoken English, and the solution I found was to practice it every single morning for 10 minutes before I did anything else. The morning habit I developed was simple to describe, but required real commitment to practice daily without exception. Every morning, immediately after waking up, before reaching for my phone or getting out of bed, I spent 10 minutes speaking English out loud. The speaking was entirely unscripted and unprepared, which was the crucial point. I was not reading something aloud. I was not repeating memorized sentences. I was generating new language from my own thoughts in real time, every single morning. Unscripted means not written in advance or following a pre-prepared text. Generating means producing or creating from your own resources. The content of those 10 minutes followed a simple structure that I maintained consistently. In the first 3 minutes, I described how I felt at that moment, my physical sensations, my energy level, my mood, any thoughts that were present as I woke up. In the next 4 minutes, I described my plans for the day ahead, what I needed to do, what I was looking forward to, what I was slightly dreading, any logistical details that were on my mind. Logistical means related to the practical planning and organization of activities. In the final 3 minutes, I said one honest observation about my English learning, something I had noticed recently, something I was proud of, something I was still finding difficult, or something I wanted to work on. The 10 minutes always ended with a deliberate closing sentence, something like, "That is my morning English practice done. Today I will speak English as much as I can." This closing sentence felt almost ceremonial at first, slightly artificial, but over time it became a genuine ritual that sent a signal to my brain about the kind of day I intended to have with language. Ceremonial means relating to a formal or symbolic act that marks a significant moment or intention. Ritual means a series of actions performed regularly as a way of marking something important. The morning is a neurologically unique time for skill practice, and this is not just a subjective observation, but something that is well supported by cognitive science and sleep research. During the night, your brain consolidates the learning and experiences of the previous day, transferring information from short-term to long-term memory, and strengthening neural connections that were formed during waking hours. Consolidates means strengthens and makes more permanent. This means that the brain you wake up with is, in a literal neurological sense, slightly more capable than the one you went to sleep with, because it has processed and organized the previous day's inputs while you slept. In the first 15 to 20 minutes after waking, your brain is in a transitional state between the neural patterns of sleep and the fully active patterns of waking consciousness. In this transitional state, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for self-criticism, social anxiety, and evaluative judgment, is not yet fully activated. Evaluative judgment means the process of assessing whether something is good or bad, right or wrong, successful or unsuccessful. This reduced self-critical activity in the early morning means that your English production during this window is less inhibited by the fear of making mistakes, less filtered by the inner critic that normally monitors your language so carefully. Inhibited means held back or prevented from flowing freely. Practicing a cognitively demanding skill like spontaneous language production during this neurological window means that you are building the skill at a time when your brain is maximally receptive and minimally defensive. The language that comes out during morning practice is often more natural and more fluid than language produced later in the day under full self-critical surveillance. Surveillance here means the watching and monitoring of one's own behavior. This is why so many language learners who adopt the morning practice habit report that the language flows more easily in the mornings than at other times, and why the habit, practiced daily, leads to such significant and relatively rapid improvements in overall speaking fluency. The changes that the morning habit produced in my English speaking were not instantaneous, but they were measurable, and they followed a clear pattern that I think you will find genuinely encouraging. After the first 7 days of daily morning practice, skur 7 seconds, and a tiwarik pretend the change was subtle but real. The most noticeable thing was not that my English had become dramatically better, but that the first few seconds of spontaneous speaking had become fractionally easier. The slight hesitation at the very beginning of speech, that moment of internal reaching for the first word, Yan was slightly shorter and less anxious than before. 7 days was enough to begin smoothing the very first step of the speaking process. After 30 days, the changes were more significant and began to affect real conversations rather than just morning practice sessions. I noticed during an online meeting that I had answered 3 questions from colleagues in English without the usual internal hesitation and self-correction that typically preceded my speaking. Preceded means came before. My answers were not perfect, but they were spontaneous and clear, and they arrived quickly enough that the conversation did not stall waiting for me. Stall means to stop making progress or to slow to a halt. This was the first time I had genuinely experienced my English speaking as automatic rather than effortful, and the feeling was exactly as liberating as I had hoped it would be. After 3 months of consistent morning practice, the improvement was significant enough that people who knew me noticed and commented on it. A close colleague who worked with me regularly said that I seemed much more comfortable in English conversations, and a native English speaker friend said that my English had a different quality to it, something more natural and less constructed. Constructed means built deliberately piece by piece, rather than flowing organically. And these observations from people who heard my English regularly were the most convincing evidence I could have had that the morning habit was genuinely and measurably changing the quality of my spontaneous spoken English. Based on my own experience and on conversations with other learners who have adopted variations of this practice, I have refined the morning speaking routine into 3 clear steps that I believe represent the most effective version of the habit. The first step is the feelings report, which takes approximately 3 minutes. You describe in spoken English exactly how you feel at the moment of waking. You name physical sensations, energy level, mood, and any immediate thoughts or concerns that are present. You speak without stopping, without correcting yourself mid-sentence, without going back. If a sentence comes out wrong, you continue to the next one. The point is fluent forward motion, not grammatical precision. Precision here means exactness and accuracy in every detail. The second step is the day preview, which takes approximately 4 minutes. You describe your plans for the day ahead in as much detail as feels natural. You name specific things you need to do, things you are looking forward to, things you are slightly concerned about, practical arrangements and logistics, people you will interact with, challenges you expect to face. The more specific and personal you make this, the more effectively it builds the direct connection between your authentic daily life and your English language production. You should aim to speak continuously for the full 4 minutes, even if the language is imperfect, and even if you have to use simpler structures than you would prefer. The third step is the English affirmation, which takes approximately 3 minutes. You say several sentences in English about your language learning that are honest, specific, and positively oriented. Not empty self-praise like I am amazing at English, but genuine, grounded acknowledgments of your progress and your intentions. Such as, I have noticed this week that I am hesitating less before I speak, or I still find phone calls in English more challenging than face-to-face conversations, but I am getting more comfortable. Or, today I want to pay attention to how I handle moments of uncertainty in conversation and try to stay calmer when I do not know a word. Several common mistakes appear consistently among learners who try the morning speaking habit and find that it does not seem to be working for them, and understanding these mistakes in advance can save you weeks of frustration. The first and most common mistake is scripting the practice in advance. Some learners are anxious about what to say during their 10 minutes, write notes the night before about what they will discuss in the morning session. This completely undermines the habit because the entire value of the practice lies in its spontaneous, unplanned nature. If you have prepared what you will say, you are rehearsing, or not producing spontaneous language, and rehearsal does not build the spontaneous production skill you are trying to develop. The second common mistake is stopping to correct mid-sentence. Many learners trained by years of formal language study to prioritize accuracy over fluency interrupt themselves constantly during the morning practice to go back and fix a grammatical error or find a better word. This disrupts the forward momentum of speech and reinforces exactly the stop-start, a self-monitoring pattern that the practice is designed to dissolve. Let the sentences come, imperfect as they are. The corrections can happen during your formal study time. The morning practice is for fluency, not for accuracy, and the distinction between those two goals is one of the most important things a language learner can internalize. The third mistake is practicing too quietly or only in your head. The practice must involve real, inaudible sound because the physical act of producing voiced language engages different neural processes than silent mental rehearsal. Audible means loud enough to be heard. You do not need to shout, but you do need to actually make the sounds of English with your throat, mouth, and breath. Whispering is acceptable if necessary. Thinking is not sufficient. Sufficient means enough for the purpose. The voice is the instrument, and you need to play it every morning. Today I shared a personal story of failure and what it led me to discover. The morning speaking habit is not a magic solution, and it is not the only thing you need to become fluent. But for the specific and very common problem of the gap between language knowledge and spontaneous spoken production, it is one of the most effective targeted practices I have ever found or used myself. 10 minutes every morning, before your phone, before your coffee, before you speak to anyone else in any language. 3 minutes of feelings, 4 minutes of day preview, 3 minutes of English affirmation. That is it. The woman at the conference who asked me what brought me there did not know that her simple question would eventually lead me to this habit and through it to a genuinely different relationship with spoken English. I am grateful for that moment, as uncomfortable as it was, because discomfort is often the starting point for the most meaningful growth. If you have your own version of that moment, a time when your English failed you in a way that still stings a little, I want you to take that feeling and use it, not as evidence of inadequacy, but as fuel. The morning habit starts tomorrow. Be there for it.